Good afternoon, colleagues. We've already passed our scheduled starting time for the meeting. I now call the meeting to order. Colleagues, we are now at a meeting. Please be seated. Please return to your seats. We've arranged 2 meetings today. After this meeting has finished at 5:30 p.m., we'll take a break of 10 minutes, and our second meeting will start at 5:40 p.m. I'd like to remind colleagues that in handling today's issues, if you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest related to the items, please, in accordance of ROP 83A, make a declaration. And ROP 84 spells out the voting rules when it comes to pecuniary interest. Item 1 on the agenda, paper FCR 2013-14-18. This item seeks approval of the recommendations, 2 recommendations of the Establishment Subcommittee. As no member has asked for a separate vote to be taken for any of the 2 recommendations, if there's no comment at this juncture, I'll put the 2 items in FCR 18 to the vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the majority of the voting members support the recommendations. The recommendations are endorsed. Next, paper FCR 19. This item invites members to support the 6 recommendations made by the PWSE at its meeting on the 28th of May, namely the recommendations in paper PWSE 5, 6, 11, 12, 9, and 10. No member has requested for separate voting on any of the item. If there's no comment now, I'll put the recommendations to the vote. Mr. Lee Chak-yan. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak on the footbridge, between the extension of the City Tower to the LegCo complex at Tama. This is not to benefit LegCo members. For barrier-free access, without this footbridge, the disabled will have to rely on 2 lifts. But the lifts may break down and other occurrences may take place. So this footbridge is for the sake of providing barrier-free access to the LegCo complex. If we support barrier-free access, then we should support the recommendation. Please do not misunderstand that the footbridge is for LegCo members. It's actually for the public, for the disabled, and for barrier-free access. In the PWSE, no member has asked for separate voting, so no officials are represented here to answer members' questions. So after members have spoken, we'll have to take a vote. Mr. Wong Yok-man. Mr. Chairman, I'm not on this item. I'm on the next one. Ms. Sito. Mr. Chairman, I understand that this footbridge between City Tower and the LegCo complex does not have to be separately voted upon. But I'd like to say that this is for barrier-free access. because the footbridge crossing Gloucester Road should have entered Admiralty Centre. If that was the case, when disabled persons want to come to the electrical complex, or staff members of the electrical who are wheelchair bound may use that footbridge. However, the administration failed to reach agreement with Admiralty Centre. Now the footbridge is just 5 feet away from the Admiralty Centre. When the lift breaks down or is under maintenance or repair, our colleagues can't even come to office because of the suspension of the lift. As for the footbridge leading from United Centre to the electrical complex, it can facilitate residents of the Eastern District and the Southern District. If they take a bus and get off at Pacific Place, so long as they can take a lift, then they can be covered all the way up to electrical complex. For those from the new territories, if they take a bus or the MTR and reach the United Centre, they can have barrier-free access to the electrical complex. I'd like to clarify that point. Now, this footbridge is really very expensive. I hope that in future, when it is constructed, it will be solemn, practical, and can minimize construction costs as well as annual maintenance costs. Thank you.
If there's nothing else, I will put this item to the vote. For those in favor, please press the button. Please press the button. Ms. Ann Chang. Chairman, I want to talk about Project 720TH. Head 706. I want to comment on the noise enclosure, which is 5 kilometers long. The enclosure will be on both sides of the road. At present, the road sides of Fanling is very pleasant to the eye because they are lined up by trees. It's just that at some sections there are some villages and some houses on the side. So I think you can provide shading by planting trees. But now, the enclosure will cost us $900 million and stretching up to 5 kilometers long. I don't think the enclosure will be very comfortable to the eye. I know there are no officials present today to answer my questions and that the item has been agreed on by the PWSC. However, I would like to put forward my views. I urge the administration to tread with caution on this item. Anyone else would like to speak? If not, I'll put this item to the vote. For those in favor, please raise their hands. That is those in favor of FCR 2013-14-19. Those in favor raise their hands. Those against raise their hands, please. I'm of the view that most of the members present are in favor of the item. And next, FCR 2013-14-20. This is to inject $15 billion to the Community Care Fund to strengthen poverty alleviation efforts to support the underprivileged and low-income families. At the WSP on the 24th of May, members were consulted. Today, Mrs. Carrie Lam, CS, Ms. Gracie Fu, DS of Home Affairs, and Ms. Candy Lau, PAS of Home Affairs, CCF, Dr. Lo Chi Kwong, Chairperson of CCF Task Force, and Mr. Feng Pek Yan, Director of Social Welfare, SWD, and Mrs. Angelina Cheng from Deep S for Education are with us today. Mr. Frederick Feng, the Chairperson of the Subcommittee on Poverty, is otherwise engaged, so Mr. Lee Chek-yen is responsible for reporting to us. At the meeting on 24th May, we discussed the injection to CCF. The subcommittee is in support of the injection. However, some members are worried about the operation of the CCF. They urge more transparency to be attached to the operation of CCF. And some members also wonder how come for some 3-year programs they haven't been incorporated into regular schemes. And some members also asked to relax the eligibility criteria for elderly dental services programs. Chairman, I would like to give some comments. You haven't pressed the button yet. 4 members are waiting to speak now, 5 minutes each. Mr. James Tan. Thank you, Chairman. The injection of $15 billion to CCF gets the support of the Liberal Party. I'd just like the administration to tell us more about the operation of the fund. This is a large sum. The government is now sitting on $2.8 trillion. So the government should be doing a better job. For the $15 billion as mentioned in para 23, no, we're talking about an injection of $15 billion, and in para 23, it mentions consulting the LegCo on possible funding provision expected to exceed $100 million. And some people criticize this procedure, saying this is too troublesome. Investment return of $1 billion per year is a large amount. Para 23 tells us that for funding provision expected to exceed $100 million. On that, the subcommittee will be consulted. But what about funding provision under $100 million? Does it mean that the LegCo will not be consulted? It's only that exceeding $100 million that the government will consult the LegCo. And I would like to ask the CS about some broad direction of governing Hong Kong. $15 billion for healthcare, $15 billion for other assistance. If such funding provision doesn't require the consultation of LegCo, then the administration would have nothing to do. Is that the case? LegCo members have the responsibility to monitor how the government is spending money. But does it mean that the administration, in the name of poverty alleviation, can bypass LegCo? Thank you for the question. In the paper, we spell out the operation of CCF. And on funding application of $15 billion, we have strengthened our mechanism. With FC's approval, injection into funds is possible. And it's not the case that we will come back to LegCo every time we ask for injection to funds. And I think members will only grant the approval for injection if they are satisfied with the operation of the fund. In the past, there were occasions when large amounts of injection were granted. As in this case, I'm chairing the Commission on Poverty. 4 LegCo members are sitting in the commission. Dr. Law is the chairman of CCF task force. Even when suggestions are agreed by him, the suggestions have to be agreed by members on the commission. We strengthen on 2 areas. They are spelled out in para 23. First of all, we propose that the Subcommittee on Poverty under House Committee or relevant panels of LegCo be consulted prior to launching brand new programs which are pilot in nature and funding provision of which is expected to exceed $100 million. And other point we suggest is that we will submit regular reports to LegCo every 6 months. Mr. Wang Yokman, I oppose the injection of $15 billion to CCF. However, I don't think my voice will be meaningful because most members support the injection and that the subcommittee already agreed on the injection. I wanted to resort to filibuster, but I can't do that alone. Now, for programs that can't be converted into regular schemes within the government, the CCF is going to take up these programs. This is a big problem. This reveals that the government is creating poverty and that the programs are not helping people at all. You are simply managing a machine to give money to people. There are so much administrative costs involved, even with CSSA and other poverty alleviation programs. The CCF was set up by Donald Trump. And now you are proposing to expand the CCF and suggest to inject $15 billion. At the beginning, you tried to ask wealthy people to donate money, but that didn't work. 94% of the fund is from public money, however. So the whole idea went wrong. You expect that there will be $1.2 billion of return per year in the coming years. How come you don't take out some money from that for poverty alleviation? We are such a wealthy city, and you are chairing the Commission on Poverty, COP. People talk about supporting education. For people supporting education policy, then you get the Secretary for Education to come and explain the policies. And now, when we talk about poverty alleviation, you are here. The chairperson of the COP is here to discuss with us. I think you should improve on programs for all the needy people. The CCF is just a PR show, and no one in LegCo opposes you. I'm alone who is opposing this injection, but I alone can do nothing. CCF is something superfluous. You only help over 60,000 people with the subsidy for needy people living in PRH. However, it was expected 170,000 people can be helped. You may not even have asked for information about subdivided flats from NGOs. You haven't been able to get information about that. Just getting $15 billion is very easy. And every year, you simply give out $1.2 billion. And if you're not doing a good job, you ask Dr. Law to help you to come up with some ideas. How will the fund be distributed? Dr. Law keeps saying that there is transparency, but I disagree. For this administration, there has never been any transparency. The donation of $100 million to Sichuan was already a shameless act. As a LegCo member, I'm going to say something that will make you feel unhappy. I will vote against this. Maybe I and Mr. Leung Kwok Hong are the only ones opposing that. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. I support the administration in allocating resources to help the poor people. However, I don't think the CCF should take over jobs of the Labor and Welfare Bureau. The CCF is a fund to plug loopholes in the existing mechanism. Now, how can the administration, how come some of the programs under CCF are not passed over to the Labor and Welfare Bureau? Will there be any plans to convert some of these programs to regular ones? The CCF has not taken over the jobs of the LWB and other bureaus. The CCF is to plug loopholes in the existing system. And we have represented people from different departments and bureaus already gave their ideas to programs under CCF. As for whether some programs under CCF will be converted to regular ones, of the 19 programs existing, 2 have been turned into regular ones. 2 have announced that 2 will be turned into regular schemes, and we are trying to find out ways to implement that. Under the basic law, the administration has to be cautious in managing our finances. As long as we think a program is worthwhile to continue, we can do that via the CCF as long as we uphold the principle of managing our finances cautiously under basic law. Any follow-up, Mr. Poon? I agree with CS, but I'm worried that some programs may continue endlessly as pilot schemes, and that it will be up to the CCF to make a decision whether such programs will be turned into regular ones. For programs under CCF, members of the public give us worthwhile opinions. we take them on board, and we also learn from our experience to see whether some programs will be turned into regular ones. Now we have to put forward some pilot schemes. We have to rely on pilot schemes first, because for some programs, once they are turned into regular ones, there will be implications. And I want to comment on Mr. Wong's point. The CCF is not to replace the government's effort in alleviating poverty. Any supplement, Mr. Poon?
Thanks, Mr. Lee Chuk-yan. Thank you, Chairman. Well, we often say that the government officials are schizophrenic, but in fact, I today have to say that I myself is a schizophrenic. Well, I always criticize this policy, but today I'm going to support this proposal. Well, there are two major principles that I find dissatisfied with. The first one is that you're circumventing the Legislative Council's monitoring, because only when the project sum exceeds $100 million will you consult the LegCo. So in the end, you're just bypassing LegCo. In effect, you are bypassing LegCo, and in effect, even for projects involving just tens of millions of dollars, you will just resort to CCF in decision-making process. The other point you make is that as far as public finance or our fiscal policy is concerned, is not catching up with the needs in the society. If things have been done appropriately, you would have been able to address the demands in the society. Well, we always ask for $20 billion additional recurrent expenditure to address social needs, and the government has been dragging its feet. Instead, the government offered cash handouts. And then the Chief Secretary was unable to agree with the Financial Secretary. In the end, the CCF was set up. So social needs were not addressed, and then you have this vault to help the underprivileged. If you're really minded to help the underprivileged, you should do something about the policies instead of having ad hoc and makeshift measures like the Community Care Fund. But I have to support this proposal because indeed these people are in need of help, and the Labour Party has actually prepared a list of people who are low-income earners living in cage homes and subdivided flats, and their rent account for 20, 30, or even 40% of their income, a very high proportion. And these are and have-nots. I don't know when they can get the help they need because you have not given us a clear timetable. Secondly, about carers' allowance or carer subsidy, I understand that that discussions about carers' allowance for elderly have started, but what about the disabled? Can caregivers of the disabled be given allowance as well? Because after all, carers of both or either the elderly or the disabled stand to lose their jobs. We talk about women unable to join the workforce because of the children's learning difficulties and whether after-class tuition can be provided. Well, can that be rolled out in all the primary and secondary schools in Hong Kong so that on the one hand, students can get the support they need. On the other hand, the parents could also join the workforce. I don't know how many people are there on your list, but we have prepared a list. I don't know when you can respond to the Labour Party's list. Now, I'm schizophrenic because I need to support the proposal so that the underprivileged would get the help they need quickly. Chief Secretary. Now, Mr. Lee talked about two principles. Now, point number one, we're not bypassing the Legislative Council. The CCF provides flexibility. Now, on fiscal management, like I said, our philosophy is that we are not society where we have a high tax regime. So we need to be prudent in our financial management. Now, for the underprivileged and those living in poor home conditions, we're going to expand the definition so that 75,000 people will be our target group under the scheme. And as for carers allowance for the disabled, well, so far we have not been able to roll this out because we are still looking into it, and things are different in nature. As for the final item, yes, again we will widen the scope. Ms. Emily Lau, Chairman, the Democratic Party supports efforts on alleviating poverty because there are more and more people living in poverty. And Chief Secretary, you also know that a member has suggested taking out $300 billion to set a 5-year program for poverty alleviation. I understand that this proposal was not supported by the administration. Chief Secretary, you know that there are people living in extreme poverty, but of course there are the extremely well-off in town as well. Now, there have been criticisms that this proposal aims at circumventing the FC. In the beginning, the CCF did have flexibility because the money didn't come from the public coffers, it came from donations. At that time, it was said that the government would appeal to tycoons and well-off to make donations, and now, according to Para 11, it seems that the government has no plan to actively appeal for donations, but will continue to receive donation and welcome the support for CCF through donations. So if you're not using public money, even if you want to do so to bypass LegCo, I won't support it. And now the money actually comes from public coffers, and it's actually a circumvention of the Legislative Council. And you can see from the paper that for under your criteria, not many projects will need to come to LegCo. Well, about the extension of landfills, well, the proposal did come to the panel for consultation. There was a lack of support, and yet the administration disregarded members' views and pushed the proposal through FC anyway, or the PWSC anyway. So that should be a clear objective as far as poverty alleviation is concerned, Chief Secretary. Are you going to appeal to members of the public or the well-off for donations? Or, in future, are you going to solely rely on public money? CS. I don't want to repeat the points on the public finance management policies. I've already made my point, but I just want to point out that we must do something with the policies as a starting point so that we can provide upward mobility for the underprivileged. So as far as poverty alleviation, employment, education, etc., we look at these areas to see how we can do better. Now, about bypassing LegCo, well, I am right here sitting in this meeting urging members to support the injection of $15 billion to provide flexibility to the CCF. Now, Ms. Lau said that not many projects will need to go through LegCo, but in fact, the Democratic Party has suggested that for projects over $30 million or $50 million, they will need to come to LegCo for approval. And in fact, half of these projects exceed those amounts mentioned. And there are many beneficiaries under these programs. Now, about the relationship with the business sector. Back then, when the first $5 billion was injected, it was clear that the money didn't come from public coffers, and we actively appealed to the business sector for donations, and we got in the end $1.8 billion of donations, and it is the government's responsibility to tackle poverty. So we are not going to actively appeal for donations, but we will actively take part in poverty alleviation. Last week we took part in an event concerning poverty alleviation by the business sector, and in fact the business sector have done a lot to alleviate poverty. I think those efforts would create a better harmony in Hong Kong than just to issue bank checks. Now, Chairman, I'm not talking about cash handouts. I'm talking about allocation of money to different policy areas. We ask for more. Now, the Democratic Party has never asked for any dishing out of money. Chief Secretary, please don't be misunderstood. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Now, I'd like the Chief Secretary to explain to us again. Now, for projects exceeding $100 million, we'll come to LegCo to consult members, which is a response to the monitoring role played by the FC. But $100 million is not a small sum. Chief Secretary, can you explain why such consultation exercise would be enough instead of seeking formal approval from FC for projects exceeding $100 million? Of course, for the range between $30 million and $100 million, where should the line be drawn? Of course, there is room for discussion. Now, you say that for projects exceeding $100 million, you will come back to report to LegCo and seek members and FC's support. But I think it should be formally approved by the committee, so as to allow for better arrangements. Now, I think that we should deliberate on the proposals. This process is necessary because after deliberation, if there is a lack of support, the proposal will be taken back for the administration to reconsider. So this is not, in fact, an obstacle to the administration's work. So please reconsider, Chief Secretary. CCF is a very important program. It provides flexibility. It plugs loopholes. But does it mean that it can bypass the Legislative Council's procedures? Now, since the proposal of injecting $15 billion into CCF, there have been much debate and criticisms. There were allegations that the government was trying to build its own vault and to circumvent LegCo's monitoring. In fact, the allocation of funds is usually done under the legal framework. There are procedures to follow. For CCF, however, it's for the relevant officials to decide how the money should be used, and there is a lack of accountability to the public. GCS. Now, first, I'd like to clarify that according to the member, that it is a departure from the established mechanism. He seems to be saying that the CCF is not effective, but I need to point out that every year the FC injects money into funds, and there have been injections of over tens of billions of dollars. Now, the reason for doing so is to allow flexibility for these trusts or trust funds to operate. For example, yesterday I visited the Sports Institute, and $7 billion were allocated to the Sports Institute between 2011 2012, so that they have the liberty to decide on their promotion of sports. As for returning to the subcommittee on poverty alleviation and other panels, well, I can say that if members unanimously vote down government's proposals, I don't think the government will just bulldoze through according to its own will, because if the proposal under CCF is considered not appropriate by different political parties, I don't think the administration will disregard the views and go ahead. Dr. Kokaki. Like many colleagues here have said, it's difficult to oppose this proposal. Now, the government has not done enough to help the underprivileged and those living in poverty, so the $15 billion is absolutely necessary. However, in 2010, when the last term of government proposed the CCF, it was established with the aim of seeking donations up to 50% of the total amount of funds from the well-off. And Mr. Henry Tang was then the Chief Secretary, and it was viewed as seeking donations from the business sector, as he had connections with the business sector, and then it was considered that he would become the chief executive. In the end, that didn't help his popularity, and he didn't become chief executive. And now there are donations pledged which are outstanding, almost $2 billion. And it seems that the objective has changed. Originally, it was to be shared between the government and the business sector, but now the government has shouldered all the burdens. So the second question, I have two questions actually. The first one is, when will the CCF be dissolved? Now, will it be used as a means to boost popularity of another king, that is for another chief secretary to be promoted? The second question is that there is a question on the effectiveness of the CCF. For example, subsidy to meet lunch expenses for students from low-income families, subsidy for TPS flat owners on CSSA, and training subsidy for children on the waiting list for rehab services. Well, if the government is determined, there must be a channel for the government to help them. it is unreasonable for the government to say that they should rely on the CCF in order to help them. Now, some say that if the work is done by the government is slow, is not effective, etc. But if this argument is sound, that means there must be a change of policy. The power should be delegated. It's not just about formulation of policies. This is important because in order to maintain a sound public administration, there are rules to follow, and the CCF is not following rules. I won't say that the CCF is not following rules, because the CCF is governed by a public body and is subject to stringent monitoring. Now, when will CCF end? The function of the CCF is to plug loopholes, and there might be unforeseen circumstances that requires help from the government. And I believe CCF will not disappear, and we need the means to flexibly respond to these circumstances.
But at the end of the day, the administration is subject to constraints. We have to follow rules and procedures. When we proceed with something and suddenly discover that there are shortcomings, it is very difficult to immediately rectify the situation. It's just like the dental services for the elderly. The original intention was to enhance home care for the elderly who are weak. But then for the weak elderly, if we are to transport them to receive dental services, there are difficulties. Therefore, the number of beneficiaries is on the low side. So we are now studying how to benefit more elderly. Mr. Tam Yu Chung, Mr. Chairman, the DAB supports this additional injection of $15 billion to the CCF. The CCF has been in place for quite some time, and it has been effective. Of course, a one-off injection of $15 billion is quite a huge injection, but we'll have to consider the targets of the CCF and what CCF is going to do. The CCF will need quite a great deal of resources. We're not quite worried that after giving the funds to the CCF, there will be abuse. There are many levels of monitoring, and the government will also monitor the CCF itself. But of course, I'd like the Commission on Poverty to do more so that we can see our measures more effective. The CS mentioned dental services. I did mention that the government had been too cautious in the past. It was trying to try measures out bit by bit. The pace was slow, and we had to wait for quite some time before we were able to see the effects. So I'd like the CS to consider this. With this injection of funds, I'd like to see those in the vulnerable groups who need services will benefit as early as possible. CS, any response? A brief response. In the past 2 years, no doubt the CCF was on the cautious side, but that's necessary. From now on the basis of the experience in the past 2 years, if we are to have new projects or existing projects are to be enhanced, we'll adopt the approach mentioned by Mr. Tam, that is to benefit those who are in need as early as possible. Any follow-up? No? Mr. Leung Chi-Chang. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I have to declare that I'm a member of the Commission on Poverty. Some items have been discussed in the Commission. My view is that this proposed injection of funds into the CCF is necessary. If you look at the past work of the CCF, you see that it's doing what the administration has not been able to do under its basic policies. The CCF was able to provide services. Very simple. We've got additional dental services for the elderly. And some elders consider the additional service sufficient. As for policies proposed by the CCF, they can attain what the government has not been able to do in the past. As for the contents of the projects under the CCF, I hope that the CS and Dr. Lo Chi Kwong can heed public advice. $15 billion may not be able to cover all the urgent items. Many urgent items are not being implemented, as mentioned by LegCo members. For the general households, rent is high. They may not be subsidized under PRH. So it's urgent to offer them assistance in terms of housing. For the disadvantaged, I can see that the CCF has been offering more needy support for these people. CS, under your leadership, we've not been able to provide a living subsidy for the low-income groups. So if you can do that, it would be more ideal. Apart from supporting the proposed injection of funds, I hope that Dr. Lo Chi Kwong can examine whether additional assistance can be offered to low-income families. Of course, there's assistance for students, but that's not enough. Other supplements have not been enough. So I hope that the CS will work harder in that regard. CS? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In principle, all CCF items are assisting low-income families because the CCF can only be used on those with financial hardship. Even though we are inclined to be lenient, declarations have to be made on assets and income. Paragraph 16 of the paper says that after obtaining the funding, we would immediately start with preparation so as to benefit the low-income families. 70,000 households are to benefit. I hope that by the end of this year, the subsidy can be distributed to the households who are not benefiting under PRH programs. Mr. Lang Chi-Chang, the CS mentioned over 70,000 households to be benefiting from the program. How many households in actual fact? CS, we had this program once, but back then, because of prudence, our definition had been very narrow. I visited a building with subdivided flats. One household could benefit while another could not. As Mr. Lee Chak-yan said, we would look at the rental level in deciding which families to help. 1P household, $3,000, 2P household, $6,000, and then 3 or more person households, $8,000. So we'll follow that basic principle. Next, Mr. Wong Kok Heng. Mr. Chairman, I support the funding proposal. I'm also of the view that the CCF is meaningful and effective. Let me share with you an actual example. For the disabled persons with one limb only, we asked for transport concession. But due to constraints under the existing system and existing laws, even though the Ombudsman had investigated into the incident and compiled a report and considered that the government should offer support, and even though both candidates in the CE election supported the move, Well, C.Y. Leung was elected. In his manifesto, he supported that. And then in his policy address this year, C.Y. Leung also said that a subsidy should be offered. But what's the outcome? Eventually, the Labour and Welfare Bureau said that it had to conduct a study first. An interdepartmental group had to be set up. We don't have a timetable for the study. This year, I visited Cambodia. There, many people suffered from explosion as a result of mines. They did not differentiate between those with one limb off or two limbs off. But now we're telling our people that if you have one limb off, you're not qualified. If both limbs are off, you're 100% qualified. Under our framework, there are a lot of bureaucracy. A lot needs to be amended. And for amendments, we need to go through a very long process. For those with one limb off, they are not entitled to disability allowance. They don't have transport concession. This underlines the importance of the CCF. It is necessary. Therefore, I support this funding proposal. Dr. Law Chi Kwong, the chairman, is here. So long as the administration fails to do that, I hope that item 20 of the CCF will be to assist those disabled persons with one limb off. Can the government go back and consider that? What the government cannot do, the CCF should do something. I'd like to have some response from Dr. Law Chi Kwong in a moment. And CS, let me ask you something. You now have 19 projects. Facts prove that these 19 items are effective. Can I suggest this? What's proved effective to be under the CCF should become standing items for the administration. Can you make that undertaking? Secondly, you should continue to seek sponsorship from the business sector. Yes, this $15 billion should continue. At the same time, you should continue with your appeal for donations. You should urge the rich to donate more. So both should be done at the same time. They should both continue. So 3 questions for the CS and Dr. Law Chi Kwong. CS, I'll answer the last 2 questions first. Mr. Wong said that for those projects operating under the CCF for quite some time and are proved to be effective, they should become standing projects. Now, that's still our working objective at the moment. Well, even if because of various reasons we cannot make those projects standing projects, we're still financially capable of continuing with those projects before they become standing projects. Secondly, the CCF was established under the Home Affairs Bureau. At any time, it can accept donations. If you ask me, I can say that in terms of assisting the poor, for the rich, in recent years, they didn't just donate money. They directly participated in projects to assist the poor. They directly mobilized their own staff members to help the poor, for example. I'm more inclined to adopt the latter approach, which will be more benefiting. Dr. Law, please be quick, 5 minutes. Well, I wanted to be quick, but if I give a direct answer to Mr. Wong, I am afraid that there may be a misunderstanding. In paragraph 17B of the paper, we would like to set up a particular item for those with severe physical disabilities who require long-term care but do not receive CSSA. Well, it will take quite some time to make preparation for that. For the time being, maybe we should do something. As for those disabled persons with one limb off, before the administration has made a decision, it's very difficult for the CCF to do something. Otherwise, we'll be bypassing the policy discussions carried out by the LWB. So the simple answer is that at this juncture, we'll not consider that. Mr. Albert Chan. Mr. Chairman, I have to state the position of the people power on CCF. In fact, 5 to 6 years ago, we already proposed a fund for the living of the grassroots. At that time, we proposed an injection of $20 billion by the government. Many disadvantaged persons or low-income families, due to policy omissions, have not been able to share the economic fruits of the government. And sometimes, policy-wise, because of the short-sightedness or negligence of the government, they've not been taken care of in terms of policies. So they had difficulties. The disabled, the weak, the elderly, etc., suffered. So we back then proposed an injection of $20 billion. And that should be directly pegged to the surplus of the CCF. We should not have a matching fund. In 2011, when the government proposed a matching fund, we objected to the proposal because the concept was wrong. For public policies, they need to take care of the need of the disadvantaged. That's the responsibility of the government, particularly when there is a surplus. Now, this direct injection of $15 billion, we welcome it. I'd also like to thank the CS for leading the task. Basically, we object to what the Home Affairs Bureau has been doing. In 2011, we strongly objected to the proposal that the HAB should lead the project. Very often, the HAB put political considerations first. It's more appropriate to put that under the LWB. In the paper, we learned that the leading bureau will still be the HAB. That's wrong. If the CS is the coordinator, that will boost our confidence in terms of fund allocation. But in terms of duties, if the HAB is responsible, I personally still think that is a mismatch. It absolutely should not be the work of the HAB. So, overall speaking, this proposal represents improvement in terms of direction. But in principle and policy-wise, there are still quite many aspects that are a distance from what we proposed back then in 2011 for a living subsidy. CS, any reply? I'd like to clarify that the CCF is still a trust fund under the HAB. The Secretariat is also in the HAB. In the past 2 years, the HAB did not intervene policy-wise. It only provided Secretariat service and respond to views on the CCF, carried out analysis, and let other government departments to implement the policies. To rectify this mismatch in terms of policy, in simple terms, the CCF should come directly under the CS. So you're suggesting that the HAB shouldn't even be the Secretariat. Well, a policy bureau will definitely have policy inclination. Yes, I'm afraid that the CS does not have that statutory power. There's no piece of legislation that the CS can establish a trust fund as a legal person. The only law is the Financial Secretary's Ordinance. I don't think Mr. Chan is suggesting putting that under the FS. Well, I think the LWB is more reasonable. CS, I've explained that the HAB is only the Secretariat, is only a tool or instrument to set up the fund. In fact, the Secretary for Home Affairs has to bear great responsibilities but no power, because a lot of powers are conferred on other departments and bureaus. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Mr. Chairman, I have to declare that I am a former CCF member. As for the contents and proposals of the paper, my party supports it. That is, the BPA supports it. The CCF has a wide variety of projects, and after stringent scrutiny and vetting, abilities other than money will also be considered, with the hope that the approved projects can be done well. Take, for example, the subsidy scheme, dental subsidy scheme for the elderly. Apart from money and participation on the part of social workers, the participation of doctors is even more important. So, generally speaking, money is not the only thing. Social participation is very important.
Some people may simply give empty promises without doing anything, but I think it would be good if there's something concrete. My question for the CS is that some programs are good in themselves, but they haven't been confirmed. Is it possible that because of manpower constraint, these programs cannot be implemented? And can you urge professionals in the community to take more part in the programs confirmed, so that the programs will be launched in a smoother manner and will be more acceptable to public? CS, please. The CCF is to make sure the programs can help the needy, and the CCF is also responsible for paying the administrative fees. So there will not be a problem because of manpower constraint. Programs cannot be implemented. If there is a need to increase manpower, then the CCF will be the unit responsible for allocating further resources. Now, before a program is launched, we need to put in lots of resources and professional ideas to give more ideas to the programs. And so colleagues bear much responsibility. I agree with Mr. Lam that we should encourage members of the public to take more part in the programs. For example, the elderly dental assistance program, where 300 dentists are already taking part in that. With active participation, the programs will be run in a smoother manner. That's why we will communicate with the professional sector concerned to ask them to take part in the programs related. CS mentioned that expenses will be paid out of the CCF. I understand that point, but in identifying professionals, it's no easy task. So apart from identifying professionals from the civil service or via the various departments, how can you identify professionals to take part in the programs? Thank you for the question. Many programs under CCF rely on service providers like NGOs. There is administrative cost for them. And when we want to help those living in subdivided flats, the NGOs are responsible for making home visits. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank NGOs for their support in the past few years to CCF programs. And if the CCF in helping them to cover the administrative cost is not so effective, we will be happy to review that. Dr. Low, I agree that the CCF is there to plug loopholes in the existing system. And it is responsible for coming up with programs to plug loopholes in our existing system. Just now, Mr. Fernando Cheung asked to allocate time within this legislative session for a debate on assistance to autistic children. But I don't think we should break the House rules so loosely because there are so many items for us to discuss. Now, not just autistic children and their families need our support. What about those with epilepsies and those with other diseases? And like Down syndrome, we need to offer concrete help to them. That's why I think CCF is effective in plugging the loopholes in the system. So I support the injection. At present, we are not relying on the matching fund. I'm sure many people in the business sectors are happy to donate money and to spare effort to help. So if the administration is going to be passive and say that they welcome donation from public, I think it's better for them to be more proactive to ask the business sector to donate money so that they can also take part in giving help. CS, I think you already gave a reply. Would you like to repeat that? When the Secretary of Home Affairs asked for a 5 billion injection, in fact, that was not over $100 million, and much efforts were put into helping 10 schools by the business sector. Was it right to use the word matching? Well, it was an issue arising from the discussion between the government and the business sector. Well, in any event, I think it's fine for the government to ask the business sector to donate money. Mr. Kim Yun, I'm sure members agree that we should help the poor. But whether we should rely, but I'm sure members are concerned about the operation of the fund. So my question is about financial prudence and the operation of the fund. I think in the past 10 years, we have had more and more funds being set up. In recent years, we have more and more large funds. At present, we have 50 funds, and as of last year, we have an amount of $74.1 billion is a large amount. And the money in the funds are mostly from public money. Usually, where public money is used, LegCo is the gatekeeper, and we have to go by way of financial prudence. all these procedures are so stringent that people may have the impression that it slows things down. So in setting up funds, we may have more flexibility. Shall we go by way of flexibility and not be stringent? I don't think so. So the administration attaches great importance to financial prudence. What about applying this principle to the operation of funds? So I want to know under what circumstances will the government set up new funds and how funds are being operated and managed. How can you monitor the spending of the funds? And what's the role of LegCo as a monitoring body? Do we still have the same role, that is as a monitoring body, as in the past? And are there any guidelines, any papers governing the use of funds? I understand that when it comes to finances, the government has lots of stringent procedures. But what about the management of funds? So how are funds operate and managed? Will you take up the question, CS, or will you defer it to the Permanent Secretary? PS, please. Thank you, Chairman. It depends. When we discussed the budget several months ago, members also asked about the funds set up. For funds set up under the laws, the LegCo and the Finance Committee can monitor the money put into the funds and how money is spent by the funds. There is a reserve fund for public work, for example, and it's operated in accordance to the law, and they is set up by resolution in LegCo. And when funds are set up, there are procedures for monitoring purpose. And how we monitor the spending of the funds. If I get it. There are some funds not set up under the law. For example, funds related to creativity. For such funds, they may have to come to FC for approval of funding application. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. LDS already made similar proposal in poverty alleviation. And the CCF was something for Henry Tong to run in the election. But now he has lost in the election, so the wealthy people no longer donate money to the fund. This is a place of politics. And if you're not prepared to tell the truth, I can hardly trust you. You can call it what you want. For example, universal pension scheme. You can always do that, but you refuse to do that. And there's another fund for health care. The healthcare HPS. You just put money in there. How can you help people? Let me tell you that Li Ka-shing doesn't have to pay tax now. Why don't you tax him on dividends he get? For people who evade taxes, they have to pay so that the poor can be helped. These people have unlimited sources of wealth, so you can get money from them and set up funds for Down syndrome patients and for other needy people. The Hong Kong MA has earned so much, but it doesn't grant the matching funds. Mr. Tang was not able to get donation from wealthy people, neither could CY Leung. So what can you do? Your move is too late now. You may go by financial prudence. And you may spend money according to that principle. You may have good intention. But for the $74.1 billion funds, you have good intention, but how come you do not appoint me to sit in the funds? I gave you similar proposals, but how come I'm not on the board of these funds? Colleagues, don't talk among yourselves. How come I'm not appointed? Is it because I do not have a good reputation? Is it because I am not clear in my position? Or is it because I was suspicious of colluding with the business sector? You haven't given any clear answer. How come I'm not on any board of these funds? I'm not there, so I think you don't have credibility. That's why I oppose you. Before you became CS, I already told you so. I told you not to go by way of matching funds. And now, 3 years later, you come back with this proposal. How can I trust you? Mr. Wong Kok Heng, you are right. I should have run for CE. In any event, I won't support you. Anyone else for first round? Second round, 3 minutes. Ms. Ip Kin Yun. I want to thank the PS for a very detailed answer. But she has not said whether there are such documents for funds set up under the law. The PS already gave an answer on how they operate. And for some others, some other funds, they have to come to FC for funding approval. Now, for the present case, some programs do not have to be approved by FC before they are launched. For example, language funds. It can get the funding and then it can start the programs before without coming to FC. But we know not how the language fund runs and how it spends money. The LegCo plays no role in operating this fund. That's why I wonder if you sacrifice stringent procedure for flexibility, and in doing so, are you undermining the role of LegCo as a gatekeeper? CS, you have responded several times. Thank you for reminding me. Over the past 2 years, CCF was very stringent in our work, and some people say that we are too conservative. That's why the number of people helped was lower than we expected. But we have to maintain flexibility while being stringent. The COP and the CCF task force are responsible for monitoring the CCF, and the CCF is a trust fund set up under the SHAI, and its account has to be audited by the Audit Commission and has to submit a report to the LegCo.
Chairman, just to follow up, the CS talked about funding approvals and monitoring of the operation of funds. Well, it seems that they're poles apart as far as LegCo's functions are concerned. We're not just talking about auditing. We look at the program and see if the objective can be met and see if it's reasonable. Well, as mentioned by Permanent Secretary, each fund has its characteristics. And about CCF, after $15 billion are injected into the fund, we will consult the relevant LegCo panels on any proposals before they are implemented. Well, we have put forward these conditions and arrangements and will definitely abide by them. Any other questions from members? If not, I now put this item to a vote. Will those in favor of FCR 2013-14 20, please raise your hands. Those against, please raise your hands. Chairman, I claim division. Okay, the claim of division has been called for, and the bell will ring.
現在開始表決。
Voting begins. Before I announce the voting results, would members please check their votes? Voting is closed. Results are displayed. Voting results: 41 for, 6 against, 1 abstained. I declare that the proposal is approved. Item 4, FCR bracket 2013-14, close bracket 21, head 170 Social Welfare Department. This item invites members to approve an increase in commitment by $200 million to $400 million for the continuation and enhancement of the short-term food assistance service. Would members please refrain from creating a noise inside this conference room? If you have things to talk about, please do that outside. The Labour and Welfare Bureau consulted the Welfare Services Panel of the Legislative Council in May on the 21st, and we have the following officials attending this item: Mr. Donald Chan, Deputy Secretary for Labour and Welfare; Ms. Jane Lee, Principal Assistant Secretary for Labour and Welfare; and Mrs. Anna Mack, Deputy Director of Social Welfare Services; and Mr. Feng Manchong, Assistant Director of Social Welfare. And Ms. Chen Yun Han, Chair of the Social Welfare Services Panel, would you please brief us on the deliberation of the panel? On the 21st of May 2013, the WSP deliberated on the funding proposal. There was general support from members on the proposal. However, members also urged the administration to provide details on the categories of the beneficiaries and their needs. And some members also requested the administration to consider extending the period to 10 to 12 weeks, and also provide subsidies for operators to pay the transportation expenses for the services incurred, and to also explore new service proposals, and whether there is a need to ask for new service proposals. If so, then there should be careful studies. 5 minutes for the 3 members who have indicated they wish to speak. Mr. Tan Ka Piu. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the 2 concerns raised at the panel's meeting. Now, about the applicants, 20 or 30% of them are CSSA recipients. I'd like to clarify this figure. Now, theoretically, CSSA should be able to cover or pay for a reasonable standard of living. Why is it that CSSA recipients still apply for assistance from the food bank? And we are concerned about the CSSA recipients living in private accommodation, because they are using their money for rent, which should be used on food. Now, the second point is about 115,400 recipients, and 36% of them have received service in the past 15 months. That is, for them, the situation was the most critical. What about those for the 40,000 of them who had used the service for more than once? They might not be CSSA recipients, but they could not even make ends meet and get meals for themselves. Who would like to take this question? Thank you, Chairman. About CSSA recipients under this short-term food assistance service project, their proportion or percentage as at the end of March is 12%. Now, very often, they might have encountered emergency situations, for example, loss of CSSA money, and their family members being hospitalized, and that might cause the emergency situation to arise, and therefore they needed to rely on food assistance. Whether or not they were really in need of short-term food assistance, we have noted the views in the community as to whether the CSSA would be able to cover their food expenses. Now, in fact, within this year, $2,000 to $4,000 would be disbursed to a supplement for CSSA recipients to meet the expenses, and we do keep an open mind. Upon completion of this short-term initiative under CCF, we will consider what is the way forward. This is what we have noted. The other point is about some 40,000 users who visit the food banks repeatedly. I'll defer to my colleague. Now, for repeated users, basically the operators would look at their needs, and we do not have a breakdown on the circumstances, but the operators would look at their needs. If there is a long-term need for financial help, they would be referred to the social welfare service unit for CSSA, and if there are other needs, they would be referred to the integrated service family service center for follow-up. Yes, just to follow up about CSSA recipients living in private accommodation, 12% of them are on CSSA, according to you. And how many of them are actually living in private accommodation, and how many of them in PRH? Chairman, I'm sorry. We collected this data from service operators. We do not have this breakdown as to their type of accommodation. Will you be able to do that? I don't think so, because we can only do that if the operators have collected data in this regard. Now, if you want to review the rent allowance, you need to think about your methodology, and we will follow this up at the panel. Mr. Wong Kok Heng. Chairman, I support this funding proposal, but I have a question. Now the projects will be increased from 4 to 7. There will be 7 projects to enhance efficiency. Now this is about food assistance, and now in the community there is a soon to expire food, one type of which comes from buffets in hotels, and I have read the relevant media reports. It seems that the food is wasted, and the other type is food coming from supermarkets, and the food items are not sold and they will be discarded. And in this metropolis, I feel really disappointed and disheartened that all the food will go to waste, because these soon to expire food items can help those in need in a timely manner. So will the Social Welfare Department discuss with the service operators and ask them to actively look for partners so that they can collaborate with supermarkets and hotels, and once they find that the food in buffets, provided in buffets, have not been consumed by their patrons, the food can be dispatched to the needy in a timely manner. One from supermarket and the other from hotels. Yes, in fact, for the 5 service operators, we do encourage them to get in touch with organizations, and there are currently food wholesalers and supermarkets working with us. There are food items that are soon to expire, or food items that might not sell well in the market, and these items will be sent to food banks. And apart from the 5 operators territory-wide, there are other organizations providing similar services, and we encourage them to work with not just supermarkets and hotels, but also vegetable stalls and other smaller stalls to provide such services. And if funds is required, we'll help them in their operation. And in future, when we have another tendering for new operators, we will consider Mr. Wong's suggestion. Thank you for accepting and considering, or accepting to consider my suggestion. Well, you talked about stalls and also supermarkets, but what about hotels? In fact, the hotels in the district can help those in need and help them out of the plight. Sorry, I missed out this part in my answer. Well, there is a company called Food Angel, and there have been much publicity in the media. They liaise with hotels, and when the food items are safe for consumption, they will be dispatched to those in need in the same day. Of course, I note that those from hotels will be high-risk food. Well, if you want to continue with your question or follow up on this question, so be it. Otherwise, I'll let another colleague to speak. Ms. Lau, Ms. Emily Lau. I support this paper, Chairman, but I don't quite understand the figure concerning food price inflation. Chairman, you understand that not just recipients of the food assistance service, even other ordinary citizens complain about food price inflation. For footnote 2, in fact, the inflation rate it's quite low. Can you explain this to me? Are you have you really quoted the correct figures? Mr. Chen. Now the paper stipulates a consumer price index A food, and it has increased by 6.4% for general inflation rate during the same period is about 4.8%.
CPIA is already nearer to the mode of consumption of the grassroots. That's number one. Secondly, for the operators in general, they're of the view that the funds are sufficient because they're able to procure large quantities of food. They're also able to liaise with fast food shops, hotels, etc., in order to produce coupons. But of course, the price actually paid will differ from the actual price that ordinary people pay. 10% will allow the operators to adopt more flexibility for the users. Ms. Emily Lau, bulk purchase will be cheaper. I understand that. But for the ordinary public, when they buy food, they shop, it's not 4% or 6% as spelled out here. Many members of the public say that commodity prices have been escalating tremendously. CPIA is not really very practical, although it's the result of your surveys. Mr. Chairman, I have nothing to supplement on CPIA. It's actually obtained in accordance with the normal mechanism, and there's consistency. As for the general public, they have different modes of consumption. When it comes to inflation, that's quite another issue to be discussed on other occasions. Ms. Emily Lau, any follow-up? No? Dr. Fernando Chung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We, of course, support this funding proposal for the sake of supporting those families who are even short of food. We cannot but support this, but we are regressing. Now we're in the 21st century, and given Hong Kong as a very advanced economic entity, over 100,000 people have benefited from the scheme. Why is it that so many people are short of food? This is not a short-term scheme. Ever since 2009, this program has been continuing and demand has been growing. And it's not just for this food assistance service. For churches and non-profit making bodies that do not receive any subvention, they've organized their own food assistance programs. I think the government has to review this situation. Why is it that our welfare system has not been able to assist these people? Why is it that we need this short-term food assistance service to prevent these people from starving? The government has to seriously examine the loopholes of our welfare system. It is just not possible that our welfare system cannot sustain these people who are short of food. Ever since 2009, what has been reviewed? The operator's experience tells us that 6 to 8 weeks is not enough for this short-term service. Some users have to continue to receive assistance. The operators have told us their experience, but still, you restrict the assistance to 6 to 8 weeks. As a result, many families are very miserable, and 17.8% of these households have encountered sudden changes and are thrown in huge difficulty, maybe because of diseases, maybe the major breadwinners of the households are suffering from diseases, and our welfare system is not sufficient to help them, such that they need this short-term service. The government should deeply review and reflect on this. Why are so many people starving? Where does our welfare system go wrong? Where are the loopholes? Do you want any answer? I just want to see what sort of reflection they've had. Mr. Chen. Mr. Chairman, in fact, this system, this scheme is not the only welfare assistance under our welfare system. Yes, there's room for improvement in terms of assisting the poor. That's why we have established the Commission on Poverty. On the 8th of July, the Subcommittee on Alleviating Poverty will discuss assistance for low-income people. Members will have noted that very often low-income people are the main beneficiaries of the food banks. In that regard, we would like to listen to the views of members, and we keep an open mind. It's not a matter of open mind. Under our welfare system, there shouldn't be such families that are starving. We have assistance for the disabled, for the low-income families, etc. Why is it that our existing system fails to help them? We have CSSA. Why are so many people starving? I asked where the loopholes are in our welfare system. Dr. Zhang, I think you should go back to the relevant panel for follow-up, of course. But of course, they should tell us why so many people are lack of food. Can he explain whether or not the scheme can be extended to beyond 8 weeks. Mr. Chan, we've discussed with the operators. Basically, 8 weeks can cover most beneficiaries. And beyond 8 weeks, the operators can consider extending the assistance. Mr. Yu Si-wing, by the end of 2013, over 110,000 people will still be receiving assistance. Has the administration calculated the number of repeated users? For these repeated users, has the administration tried to understand the reasons for repeated use? Mr. Chan, Mr. Chairman, about 30,000, that is 41,000 people. About 30% have repeatedly used the service. That's the statistics up to the end of March. We do not keep track of the categories of people involved. They are mainly low-income people or the unemployed. Quite possibly, after receiving the service, they had other sudden needs, so they had to repeatedly use the service. Mr. Yu? Mr. Chairman, over 40,000 people have repeatedly used the service. That's quite worrying. I'm worried also about abuse as a result of the leniency of the operators. I would like the administration to review the whole process to see whether there's a loophole. We're talking about taxpayers' money anyway. We, of course, want to help those who are in need. But in the process, are there any loopholes? And as a result, with so many repeated users, should the administration not review the process? Mr. Chen, we have to carefully handle this. Of course, we have set criteria. At the same time, we must allow the operators to have flexibility so that they can consider the merits of individual cases. Even for the same category of low-income people, there are different needs. We have to strike a balance. I'll defer to Mrs. Mack to see whether there's any supplement. Mrs. Mack, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his questions and comments. Every operator has its own criteria, and we have a very stringent vetting process. Regularly, we visit the operators to see whether there's room for improvement. I agree that when we further tender for the service, we'll try to see how we can prevent abuse. Any follow-up? For vetting and the workflow, I really want you to conduct a review. You have to make sure that the users are those in need. If they found a job, they may have income. If you don't try to understand the latest changes, abuse may result. So, after vetting, the administration has to conduct a review. Mr. Frankie Yick. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to share with you something about the food bank. About 2 years ago, it's reported in the newspapers that the World Bank had no more money to buy food because food had become very expensive. I tried to understand the situation with the two World Banks, both commissioned food banks, commissioned by the Commissioner. And they told me that they had not exhausted their funds yet. Dr. Fernando Cheung is not in this room. In the past, the restriction was 6 weeks. Now, they're extending this to 8 weeks. Dr. Fernando Cheung said many welfare agencies run their own food banks. So it's those food banks that lack money, not those two subvented by the government. Previously, I discussed the issue with Mr. Nip, the director. The government requires that only 10% of the funding should be used for administration. I liaised with the supermarkets to see whether fresh vegetables and meat can be distributed to the food banks daily to satisfy their needs. But then the organizations have to arrange their own delivery vehicles. The organizations told me that they had no resources to arrange for delivery transport. So can you review this? Apart from the 15% of administration fee, can transport be arranged to deliver these fresh food? Last time I told Mr. Nip, the director, that if that can be done, I'll continue to work on this. Well, that is after the closing hour of the 3 supermarkets, maybe that can be vehicle teams or fleets. Mr. Chairman, listen to me. I can make the arrangement. It's just that whether or not the organizations can have the resources to do so. Mr. Chen, I'll speak first and then Mrs. Mack can supplement. As for the proposed increase in operational subvention, the administrative resources will also be enhanced, so they'll get more funding in that regard. As for the delivery of fresh food in the respective districts, be it major supermarkets or smaller shops, they've got agreements to distribute fresh food coupons to the users, so the users can use the fresh food coupons. That's one mode of operation. Of course, there may be other modes of operation which are welcome. Mrs. Mack. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Yik for his continuous concern and liaison in this matter. In fact, most funds should be used for direct assistance to the users. As for the ceiling of 15% for administrative cost, that was actually the suggestion from honorable members when we first came here. They would not like to exceed 15% for administration cost. I believe with the enhanced resources for administrative fees, I believe transportation and delivery can be resolved. If there's still difficulty, we'll liaise with the organizations concerned to see whether we can do anything to help them. No more? Then we'll take a break of 10 minutes and we'll continue at 5:40 p.m. Thank you.